Okay, so first things first, I'm going to measure this, and I've got a 10-inch shade. So I'm going to go ahead and give myself an inch at the top for the gathering and an inch at the bottom for the hem. So I'm going to cut my fabric to 12 inches. I've got my fabric folded in half, and I'm going to go ahead and cut off the flange on the bottom. So, 12 inches. Two. And I'm going to do 3 because I need to have, or I want to have 2.5 times fullness on this shade. What that means is the shade is 64 inches in diameter. So times 2.5 is 160, I think. Anyway, I'll figure it out. But this fabric is right now, one width is 80. So actually, if I just have two widths sewed together, that will be 2.5 times fullness. All right, then we'll start with that. I'll go ahead and trim off the ends, and then I'll stitch these 2 widths together to make one long strip of fabric to go around the shade. Meet at the sewing machine. So first things first, I need to find some thread, some pink thread. I'm going to use just regular thread and not upholstery thread for this. And I definitely want it to match because I don't want my seam at the bottom of my ruffle to be obvious. So let me find some pink thread. I found some, and I'm just going to use cone thread, even though it's you know, not the strongest thread. It's fine. There's not going to be any tension on this thread. This is a very low tension project. So let me wind a bobbin. Let's see. Do I have an empty one? I do. So I'm going to do a French seam to seam these together so that both sides of the seam will look finished. And if you'd like to see a French seam start to finish and explained, I do have a video, French seam video. So with the French seam, you sew the wrong sides together first, completely opposite of what you normally do. Trim this down to 1/8 of an inch. And we're going to press it open, turn it around, and we're going to sew another seam here. That's one side. And then the other side is like this. This is the front, and then this will be the inside, but it's nice and finished, okay? So now the next thing is I am going to go ahead and do a rolled hem for the bottom. I want to make sure that I have this on the inside, okay. I'm going to put on my rolled hem foot. It's got a little rolled thing there. So you just roll the fabric into that little curved thing. Drop your foot, and then you gotta adjust your needle so it's to the side, but not too far to the side. And then you just keep feeding the fabric into that little roll. That's the way the rolled hem looks on the front, and then the back it's just a gorgeous little tiny hem. So now I'm going to take this over to my ironing table and press this really, really well before I go and put in the top ruffle. So now I've got this nice and pressed, And before I put the gathering or the ruffling on the top, I am going to go ahead and put a small hem on this, on each end, just to, and I should have pressed that, just to finish them off. I'll go press this. I got my hem pressed, so I'm going to use my blind hem foot to sew right on the edge of this. I like to use my blind hem foot to put my side seams or hems in a lot of times because it does such a nice straight stitch right along the edge. So it's perfect for top stitching or edge stitching. So now my both my side seams are in, so now I can put the ruffle in. This is a medium weight linen, so I think that my ruffle technique will work. Let's try it. Okay, and so this is going to be my trick for ruffling or gathering fabric quickly, and it only works with a lightweight, or let's see if it works with this medium weight. It should. And what we're going to do is create tension on the top thread by holding this. This is the top thread. I'm going to hold the top thread right here and just put extra tension on it as I'm stitching this fabric. I'm just running a stitch across the top of this fabric. And the tighter you hold the thread, the tighter the gathers will be. So I'm just putting a little bit of tension on this top thread manually rather than adjusting my tension on my machine, and see how it's gathering, automatically gathering up my fabric. It does a beautiful, beautiful gather. You just have to be careful you don't hold it so tight that you break your thread. So one little extra step that I'm going to do here at the sewing machine is I'm going to go ahead and take this whole long ruffled strip of fabric. I'm going to just stitch a straight stitch all the way across the top of these ruffles. So I'm just going to straighten them out a little bit and just do a straight stitch across the top. And the reason why I'm going to do that is because I used this thin serger thread, and since this ruffle is so long and it's a little bit heavy and I have such a large shade to glue around, I don't want to accidentally break a thread as I'm handling the fabric. So like as I'm moving it around and stuff like this in order to glue it to my lampshade, if this thread that I gathered in here were to break, I would lose all the gathers from that point on. And I don't want that to happen because that would be, I would have to go back and regather it all. So I'm gonna just go ahead and run a straight stitch across this whole ruffle so that I have one extra protection from that happening. The other thing that this is gonna do is it will cause my ruffles to be a little bit flatter and a little bit more compact, which will make gluing to the lampshade easier. So as I'm doing this, I'm just kind of straightening out my ruffles and flattening them out as I go. So I took the lampshade and I set it on top of this vase. I took out the bottom, there's this bottom diffuser thing that just kind of rests inside the inside lip of here. So I set the lampshade, or the lamp, yeah, I set the lamp, or the pendant light, I guess you could call it, on top of this so that it could raise it up so that my fabric would just hang down rather than hitting the table and making it a little bit more difficult. So this is just perfect eye level, so now I can go ahead and start gluing. I'm gonna start with my seam right on top of this seam because when the lights are on, this shows, this is very apparent, and I want my seams to be in the same spot. because when the light's on, I would hate to see a seam here and another seam here and another seam there. So, and I'm gonna go ahead and put my fabric, kind of pile it up on top of my shade to support it, so it's not hanging down and dragging down the edge. My hot glue is very hot right now because I just heated up the gun. I'm starting out in really short distances because my glue is so hot right now that I don't want it, it's just running. So I'm gonna have to go shorter spurts of glue until I get going a bit and my glue cools off. And this is where my fabric is not as gathered up. Actually, it's a little less gathered up there. So what I'm gonna do here is I'll stick it to the glue so that it gets glue on all the fabric, and then I'm just gonna slide it while it's still cool, slide it down, while it's still movable before it cools, so that it's gathered up a little bit more, so we have a little bit tighter gathers there. I'll show you how I do that. So stick it all. All right, so I got it all stuck there. Now I'm going to just pull it over so I get a tighter gather. It's not the best way to do it, so I wouldn't recommend doing the whole shade like this because it's difficult, but looks like it's going to be perfect. Look. Stretch it out just slightly. It's going to make it just around. So it's just barely. I want it to overlap quite a bit, so I'll just pull out and stretch these gathers out a little bit as I go now. Okay, we're back at the beginning and I'm overlapping like that. So here's the seam and I'm going to overlap it by about another inch. But let me go make the banding and we'll attach the banding next. Okay, so for the edge banding, I'm just using a sheet of poster board from the Dollar Tree, and I'm going to cut it into 1.5 inch strips. There's one. I think that'll work. So this has paint on the other side, so if you see the green, that's what that is. Okay, now there's my cardboard band for around the top. Now I need my fabric. That's 1.5 inches, so I'm going to go 3 inches. I'm going to hold this up to the light and see if I can see the green through the cardboard and the fabric. No. Okay, we're okay. So I'm laying it down, but then I'm also pulling it that way. I'm just pushing it down so I can make sure that this is nice and tight. And there's no puckering or gathering in that fabric. All right, now the ends, I'll do this pretty much just like upholstery. We'll wrap it like a present. So this will be the top part. The other side I will not do that too. I'll just leave this raw so that it'll overlap it with less bulk. But what I will do is I'll put a dot of glue inside of there to close that. And once that cools, I'll cut that to make it nice and even. This way this end is really thin. There's no cardboard under here, so that I can overlap this end with the other end that's finished. And it won't be really thick. And again, we're going to start at the seam. I need to trim off all these edges first. Much better. So for this part of the shade, I'm doing pretty liberal amount of glue, and I'm pulling the trim pretty tight to get it pretty tight around the edge. And I'm letting it hang over the top by about 1/4 of an inch. So now let me tell you that if this works to cut your fabric and your strip of cardboard completely rectangular and straight, because my drum shade is completely flat. It's not A-frame in any way at all. If you have a shade that has any sort of angle to it, any sort of A-frame angle to it, cutting your fabric and your trim completely rectangle like this won't work. And if you want to see how to cut your cardboard and your fabric properly for a shade that has an A-frame shape to it, you can check out, I have 2 videos about that right here. You can click on those if your shade is angled at all. And I'll link to them at the end too. I'll put a playlist together for my lampshades because I've got quite a few lampshade tutorials now. Pull tight and hold. Pull tight and hold. You want to be careful you don't push like in individual spots like this, because you will end up with like a wavy. So that's why I'm going like kind of just moving back and forth on here so we don't get a wavy band. You don't want it to be going in and out. No undulating bands. Okay. I need to steam it and put the bottom diffuser shade back on. Clean it up of any loose threads or hot glue. Hang this baby up. Let's see how it looks. If you're thinking about doing a lampshade like this, check out the playlist that I have right here. It'll give you all the tips and tricks for doing every style of lampshade. So check that playlist right here.